So I'd like to tell a story about where I see God at work in this ministry. Several months ago, I began a Bible study in a local jail which houses Class D felons who are in a substance abuse program. And one night during the Bible study, we were having a wonderful conversation about grace, and there was this amazing moment where I could see something hit the young man who was sitting across from me. He was in his chair, and we've been talking about that moment when we reckon with the power of God's forgiveness and grace in our lives, and how that becomes the seed of metanoia, the seed of change, where we're able to live a different kind of way. And when we had that discussion, I could see that it had intrigued him, and then at a moment it just kind of washed over me. You could see the change in his face, the way that he was sitting. And even though we were talking about something else by this point, when it came back around the table to him, he had said the words, "Can I be baptized?" And when he said that, everyone in the room got very excited. And I said, I don't know. Have you ever seen a baptism in a jail before? I don't know how we would do that. And some of the other guys made some suggestions. And someone said, well, maybe we should ask the chaplain. I said, oh, that's a great idea. We'll ask the chaplain. Maybe we can get a tub in here of some kind and have a baptism behind the bars. And then later on in the discussion that evening, we had gotten to the point where we were praying. It was at the very end. We'd already gone way past the time that had been allotted. And as we were praying, I just kept hearing this verse in my mind from Acts chapter 8. And so after it was done, I said, guys, I know it's late, I know you got to get back, but can we please just look at something in Acts chapter 8 before we go? And so we all opened our Bibles, and we read the story of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. And so Philip joins, by the movement of the Spirit, a chariot, where there's an Ethiopian eunuch who is reading the scroll from Isaiah, and Philip says, do you know what you're reading? And the eunuch says, how can I unless someone explains it to me? And so it says, beginning with this passage, Philip began to proclaim the good news of Jesus to him. And then it says that the Ethiopian eunuch stops the chariot and points to some water and says, is that water, then what is to prevent me from being baptized? And they get off the chariot, and Philip baptizes them there on the spot. So when we read that passage, we closed the book, and I said to this young man, is that a bathroom over there? And he said yes. And I said, is there water in that bathroom? And he said yes. I said, then what is to prevent you from being baptized? And at that moment, everyone in the room, there was about maybe 8 or 10 of us, all came up about 6 inches off the ground. And we went into this little bathroom, and I got to tell you, I'm a good disciple. I believe, and I've even written papers in seminary defending my belief that the proper baptism is full immersion in the water, no sprinkling, no pouring water over your head. But at that moment, the Holy Spirit intervened and said, we're going to do this a different way. And so I reached my hands into the sink, and I filled them with water, and he was standing beside me, and I poured the water over his head, and I baptized him in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And at that moment, it was as though the Spirit of God poured into that room, and it was electric. It was amazing. Everyone started laughing and crying. And I got to tell you about something that God did in that moment. I mean, not only was there an individual who experienced the newness of life that comes from entering into the death and the resurrection of Jesus, but also there was something that was transformed, and it wasn't just all of us. So in these bathrooms, you have this unit, this piece of plumbing, which is like a toilet and a sink all in the same thing. So you might have seen one of these before. And there's a sink on top, and there's a toilet seat down at the bottom. It's stainless steel. There's no seats. There's no parts that can, be taken off or anything. And it's cold. It's hard. In my opinion, there's something undignified and dehumanizing about it. Because if you think about it, every human being wants to wash his hands after using the bathroom, and even when you're standing there washing your hands, you can't help but be right in the presence of where you just had to go to the bathroom. And they only make them for prisons. So, when you see one of those, you know exactly where you are. So if you wake up one morning and you had been dreaming about freedom, dreaming about being at home with your family, when you wake up and you look over in your cell and you see one of those units, that sink and toilet thing, you remember exactly where you are, in prison behind bars. And that reminds me of the cross. Because you see, in the ancient world, the cross was a symbol of state terrorism. The cross was an instrument whereby people were crucified, political enemies, rebels, rebel rousers, people who dared to buck the power of the Roman Empire. And every time somebody looked at one of those crosses, they remembered what happened to their father or their brother or their son or anyone who dared to stand up in the face of oppression. And what God did on that cross was to turn it into a symbol of our liberation. And now we have it in our sanctuaries, we hang it around our necks, we look at our cross, and we remember the freedom that we have in God. Well, in that moment, in that baptism, God poured into that room and took that monstrous piece of plumbing and transformed it into a baptistry, so that now every time that young man goes to wash his hands or encounters one of those things, he's not going to remember where he is, but to whom he belongs. It turned into a baptistry, into a symbol of his liberation. And I got to be a part of that. And when you are a part of an experience like that, when you're able to be the one who puts his or her hands into the water and baptize someone into Christ, to be a conspirator with God to transform a sink and a toilet into a baptistry, then you know you are being used for something holy. That's something that I would like everyone, any person, to be a part of. That's why I support Missions Behind Bars and Beyond, because the Spirit of God dwells richly in this ministry.